The ancient dragon Valtherus had seen many things in his 3,000 years of life. He had watched stars being born and dying. He had seen entire civilizations rise from nothing and fall back into dust. He had witnessed wars that lasted centuries, and peace that lasted even longer. But never in all his long years had he seen anything quite like the tiny human infant lying in the crystal cave beneath Mount Helios. The baby was so small that Valtherus could have held him in one of his massive claws. The child lay on a bed of soft moss that someone had carefully arranged. His skin was pale, but healthy. His eyes were closed in peaceful sleep. But what made the dragon stop and stare were the strange markings that covered the baby's arms and chest. The markings looked like tiny silver lines that ran under the skin. They pulsed with a soft blue light that matched the rhythm of the baby's heartbeat. Valtherus had never seen anything like them in all his years of studying the various races that lived among the stars. These markings were completely new to him. The dragon lowered his great head closer to examine the child. As he did so, the baby opened his eyes. They were not the brown or blue eyes that human babies usually had. Instead, they seemed to hold tiny points of starlight that swirled and danced like distant galaxies. The baby looked directly at Valtherus without fear. In fact, he seemed to smile. Valtherus felt something he had not experienced in over 1,000 years. It was a feeling of responsibility, mixed with something that might have been love. This small, helpless creature needed protection. More than that, the dragon somehow knew that this baby was important in ways that went far beyond what anyone could imagine. The dragon carefully picked up the infant with one claw. The baby did not cry or struggle. Instead, he reached out with one tiny hand and touched the dragon's scales. Where the small fingers made contact, Valtherus felt a warm, tingling sensation. It was as if the child was somehow connecting with him on a level deeper than physical touch. Looking around the crystal cave, Valtherus found other signs that someone had been here recently. There were strange symbols carved into the cave wall that glowed with the same blue light as the baby's markings. The symbols were written in a language so old that even Valtherus could barely remember its meaning. It was the first language of the cosmos, a language that existed before the various alien races had developed their own ways of speaking. Near the symbols, the dragon found a small device made of materials he did not recognize. It was no bigger than his thumb, but it hummed with contained energy. When he touched it with his claw, images appeared in the air above it. The images showed star maps and mathematical equations and diagrams of technologies that seemed impossible, even by the standards of the most advanced civilizations. But most importantly, the device showed an image of the baby. In the image, the child had grown into a young man. The silver markings on his skin were brighter and more complex. His eyes held even more starlight than they did now. Around him swirled energies that could reshape matter itself. Valtherus understood then that this was no ordinary human child. This baby was something special, something that had been created or chosen for a purpose that the dragon did not yet understand. But he knew without doubt that the child must be protected until that purpose became clear. The dragon made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would raise this child as his own. He would teach him the old ways and the deep knowledge that dragons had gathered over millions of years. He would prepare him for whatever destiny awaited him among the stars. Valtherus named the baby Temin, which in the old language meant bright hope. It seemed fitting for a child whose eyes held starlight and whose skin bore markings of power beyond imagining. The years that followed were unlike anything Valtherus had ever experienced. Raising a human child was very different from the solitary existence he had known for so long. Temin grew quickly, as human children do. He learned to walk and talk much faster than Dragon Young would have. But he also learned things that no human child should have been able to understand by the age of 5. Temin could speak not only the common galactic language, but also the ancient tongue of the cosmos. He could read the star charts that Valtherus showed him and understand their meaning. Most remarkably, he seemed to know things about advanced technology and energy manipulation that he had never been taught. When Temin was 7, he accidentally made one of the crystal formations in there. Cave changed shape just by concentrating on it. When he was 10, He learned to communicate with the small creatures that lived in the deep caves using only his thoughts. By the time he reached 15, the silver markings on his skin had grown more complex and now covered most of his body in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on his mood. Valtheris watched his adopted son grow with wonder and some concern. The boy's powers were increasing rapidly. Sometimes the dragon caught glimpses of knowledge in Taemon's eyes that seemed far too old and deep for someone so young. It was as if ancient memories were slowly awakening within him. The dragon taught Taemon everything he could about the galaxy. Beyond their world, he told him about the various alien races and their cultures. He explained the politics of the great civilizations and the technologies they used to travel between the stars. He shared the wisdom that dragons had accumulated over eons of observation and study, but Valtheris also kept their existence secret from the outside world. He knew that if other beings discovered Taemon, they would either try to use his powers for their own purposes, or they would fear him and try to destroy him. Neither option was acceptable to the dragon, who had come to love the strange human child as his own son. For 20 years they lived peacefully in the crystal caves beneath Mount Helios. Taemon grew into a young man of remarkable abilities and quiet wisdom. His eyes now held the light of entire nebulae, and his markings pulsed with energies that could be felt across great distances. It was these energies that finally drew attention from the stars above. Deep space monitoring stations began to detect unusual readings coming from the previously ignored planet of Kairos. The signals were unlike anything in their databases. They seemed to pulse with intelligence and power that suggested the presence of something extraordinary, unknown to Valtheris and Taemon. Their quiet life was about to change forever. Ships were already being prepared in distant star systems. Beings of various species were studying the energy readings and making plans to investigate their source. The time of hiding was coming to an end. Commander Nari stood on the bridge of her exploration ship, looking at the planet below. Kairos looked like any other remote world from space. It had blue oceans and green forests. White clouds drifted across its surface. Nothing about it seemed special or dangerous. But the energy readings her instruments were picking up told a very different story. The signals coming from the planet were stronger than anything her team had ever recorded. They pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. More troubling was the fact that the energy patterns matched nothing in the Galactic Council database. After 3 days of scanning, they still had no idea what was causing the disturbance. It was a veteran commander who had led dozens of first contact missions. She had seen many strange things in her travels across the galaxy. But something about this planet made her nervous in a way she could not explain. The energy readings felt old, ancient beyond measure. Somehow aware, her science officer Jinwoo approached her station with a worried expression on his face. He was a brilliant xenobiologist who specialized in studying unknown life forms. His equipment could analyze the genetic structure of any known species in minutes. But today, he looked confused and concerned. "Commander, the readings are getting stronger," Jinwoo reported. "Whatever is down there seems to be responding to our presence. The energy pulses have increased by 30% since we arrived in orbit." Nari nodded grimly. That was exactly what she had been afraid of. Active responses to their presence usually meant one of two things. Either they were dealing with advanced technology that was designed to detect visitors, or they were looking at some form of intelligent life that was aware of their ship. Her technical specialist Minho joined them at the command station. He was younger than the others, but he had an incredible talent for understanding alien technologies. His instruments could decode most energy patterns and identify their purpose. But today, even he seemed puzzled. "I have been running analysis on the signal patterns," Minho said. "The energy signature has similarities to some very old records in our database, but the matches are incomplete. It is like looking at pieces of a puzzle that we have never seen before." Nari made her decision. They would have to land on the planet and investigate directly. Staying in orbit would not give them the answers they needed, and the Galactic Council was expecting a full report within the week. "Prepare the landing shuttle," she ordered. We go down in 1 hour, full protective gear and maximum sensor equipment. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere of Kairos without incident. As they descended toward the surface, the energy readings grew even stronger. Minho's instruments were going wild trying to process all the data they were receiving. The signals seemed to be coming from a mountain range in the northern continent. They landed in a clearing near the base of Mount Helios. The mountain was impressive even by galactic standards. It rose almost 10 kilometers into the sky and was composed of some kind of crystalline rock that sparkled in the sunlight. But what drew their attention were the caves that dotted its lower slopes. The caves glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed in the same rhythm as the energy readings they had detected from space. Nari had never seen anything quite like it. The light seemed to come from deep within the mountain itself. As they approached the cave entrance with their scanning equipment, Jinwoo suddenly stopped walking. His bioscanner was showing readings. That should have been impossible. According to his instruments, there were 2 life forms inside the cave. One was enormous beyond belief. The other was much smaller, but gave off energy readings that were off the scale. Commander Jinwoo whispered, "I think we should be very careful. The large life form registers as something that should not exist, and the smaller one is generating more energy than our ship's main reactor." Before Nari could respond, a voice spoke from the darkness of the cave. It was deep and ancient, and seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "You have traveled far to reach this place," the voice said in perfect galactic standard language, "but you are not welcome here. Leave now, and forget what you have found." Nari felt her heart racing, but she held her ground. She had not come this far to be turned away by threats. "We are representatives of the Galactic Council," she called back. "We detected unusual energy readings from this location. We only want to understand what is happening here." There was a long silence. Then slowly, a shape emerged from the cave that made all 3 explorers step backward in amazement. It was a dragon, not one of the small flying creatures that lived on some worlds, but a true dragon of legend. It was over 30 meters long with scales that seemed to be made of living silver. Its eyes were like twin suns that burned with ancient intelligence. Valtheris looked down at the 3 small beings who had invaded his sanctuary. He could sense their fear, but also their curiosity and determination. They were scientists, not warriors. That was something at least. Their presence here meant that Timon's secret was no longer safe. "You speak of the Galactic Council," Valtheris said. "I remember when your various species were still learning to make fire. I have watched your civilizations grow from nothing, and I have seen what happens when power falls into the wrong hands." Nari found her voice despite her amazement. "We're supposed to be myths. Ancient stories told around campfires. Yet here was one standing before her speaking of things that had happened millions of years ago." "You are real," she said in wonder. "The old stories were true." "Some stories are true," Valtheris replied. "Others are warnings. The question is which kind of story will be told about what you find here today." Before anyone could respond, another voice spoke from behind the dragon. This one was younger and clearly human. "Let them approach Valtheris. I want to meet them." A young man stepped out from the shadows of the cave. Nuri's breath caught in her throat when she saw him. He appeared to be about 20 years old, with black hair and kind eyes. But those eyes held points of light that swirled like distant galaxies. And his skin was covered with intricate silver markings that pulsed with the same blue energy they had detected from space. Temmet looked at the 3 visitors with curiosity. He had never seen other beings from the stars before. Valtheris had described them to him, but seeing them in person was different. He could sense their emotions, their thoughts, even their intentions. They were genuinely curious and meant no harm. "I am Taman," he said simply. "Welcome to Kairos." Jinwoo's scanner was making alarm sounds as it tried to analyze the young man. According to the readings, Timon's genetic structure was unlike anything in their database. His DNA seemed to contain elements from dozens of different species, all somehow perfectly integrated into a single being. Minho's energy detectors were showing impossible readings. The power emanating from Temin was greater than anything they had ever measured, yet he seemed completely human, except for the strange markings in starlight eyes. Nari stepped forward. despite Valtherus's warning growl. She had to know more about this extraordinary young man. "What are you?" she asked softly. Taman smiled sadly. "I was hoping you could tell me," he replied. "I've been searching for that answer my entire life," as if responding to his words. The markings on Taman's skin began to glow brighter. The energy reading spiked dramatically. Somewhere deep in the cave system, ancient machinery that had been dormant for millennia began to slowly wake up. The investigation had become something much more significant than any of them had expected. Commander Nari spent 3 days studying the energy readings from Taman, while her team ran every test they could think of. The results were beyond anything they had expected. Jinwoo's genetic analysis showed that Taman's DNA contained sequences that should not exist. His cells held information from species that lived in different parts of the galaxy, had never met each other. Minho's energy scans were even more disturbing. The power signatures coming from Temon matched ancient records that were classified at the highest levels of the Galactic Council. These were readings that were only supposed to exist in myths and legends. Stories about the first race that ever achieved space travel. On the third night, Nerisse sat alone in her ship reviewing the classified files that her commander's status allowed her to access. Now what she found made her blood run cold: the energy signature from Taman was an exact match for readings that had been recorded at sites across the galaxy. Sites that were connected to the progenitors. The progenitors were the stuff of legend. They were supposed to be the first intelligent species in the galaxy, the ones who built the hyperspace network that all modern civilizations used for faster than light travel. According to the stories, they had disappeared millions of years ago after achieving some kind of transcendence that took them beyond physical existence. But the classified files told a different story. The progenitors had not transcended, had been fighting something that threatened all life in the galaxy. They had lost. Nari called Jinwoo and Minho to her quarters and shared what she had discovered. The three of them stared at the classified documents in stunned silence. If Taman was connected to the progenitors, then his existence had implications that went far beyond their small investigation. Meanwhile, on the planet below, Valtherus was having his own crisis. The dragon had kept the truth about Taman's origins hidden for 20 years. But now, with outsiders asking questions, he knew he could no longer stay silent. That evening in the Crystal Cave, Valtherus told Taman the full story of how he had been found. The dragon described the figure in advanced armor who had placed the infant in the cave, how that figure had spoken in the ancient language of the cosmos before disappearing into pure light, how the cave walls had been carved with symbols that were older than most civilizations. Taman listened to this revelation with growing amazement. The strange dreams he had been having for years suddenly made sense. The visions of vast cities among the stars, the memories that seemed to belong to someone else, the knowledge of technologies that he had never been taught. "I am not human, am I?" Taman asked quietly. Valtherus shook his great head. "You are human, but you are also something more. Something that was created by the progenitors for a purpose that I do not fully understand." As they spoke, the markings on Taman's skin began to glow brighter than ever before. Deep in the cave system, ancient machinery that had been dormant for millions of years started to activate. Energy pulses shot through the crystal formations and up into space, where they were detected by monitoring stations across the galaxy. Far from Kairos, automated systems that had been waiting for eons suddenly came online. On a dozen different worlds, progenitor sites began broadcasting signals that had not been heard for millions of years. These signals carried a simple message repeated in every known language: "The heir has awakened." The first to respond were the hegemony forces led by General Dasung. The hegemony was an alliance of aggressive species that believed in conquest through superior firepower. They had been searching for progenitor technology for centuries, believing that it would give them the power to rule the entire galaxy. General Daesung had spent his entire career studying the few progenitor artifacts that had been discovered. He knew that whoever controlled their technology would become unstoppable. When his ships detected the awakening signals, he immediately assembled the largest fleet he could command and set course for Kryr. At the same time, the Preservation Coalition detected the same signals. Led by Elder Sumin, the coalition was dedicated to protecting and preserving life throughout the galaxy. They believed that progenitor technology could be used to heal worlds that had been damaged by war and disease. Elder, Suman's own species was dying from a cosmic plague that had been spreading through their star system for generations. She had devoted her life to finding a cure and had always hoped that progenitor healing technology might be the answer. The awakening signals reached her ships. She knew that this might be their last chance for survival. Both fleets began racing toward Kairos at maximum speed. The hegemony forces were closer, but the coalition ships were faster. It would be a close race to see who arrived first. On Kairos, Nare received emergency communications from the Galactic Council warning her that multiple fleets were approaching her position. She was ordered to secure the source of the energy readings and prepare for possible hostile contact. Nari rushed down to the crystal cave to warn Taman and Veltheris about what was coming. She found them deep in discussion about Taman's true nature and the growing power of his abilities. "We have a problem," Nari announced. "There are warships coming. Multiple fleets from different factions. They all want whatever is generating these energy readings." Taman looked up at her with eyes that now held the light of entire star systems. "They want me," he said simply. "The awakening has begun, and I cannot stop it." As he spoke, the crystal formations around them began to resonate. With harmonic frequencies, the sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It seemed to speak directly to the soul and carry meanings that went beyond words. Veltheris spread his great wings protectively over Taman. "Then we will face whatever comes," the dragon declared. "You are not alone in this." But even as he spoke, they all knew that their peaceful life was ending. Forces were converging on Kairos that would change the fate of the entire galaxy. And at the center of it all was a young man who was only beginning to understand the true scope of his destiny. The markings on Taman's skin pulsed with increasing intensity as ancient programming awakened in his genetic structure. Somewhere, in the depths of his mind, voices that had been silent for millions of years began to whisper. The time of hiding was over. The time of choice was approaching. Above them, in the darkness of space, the first enemy ships were already entering the star system. The first ships to arrive in the Kairos system belonged to General Desung and the Hegemony fleet. They came out of hyperspace with weapons charged and shields raised. The General's flagship was a massive battlecruiser called the Iron Fist that bristled with enough firepower to destroy a moon. General Desung stood on his bridge studying the peaceful planet below. He had spent decades searching for active progenitor sites, and now he had found what might be the greatest discovery in galactic history. According to his sensors, there was a single individual on the planet's surface who was generating more energy than most space stations. Begin orbital bombardment of the surrounding area. Desung ordered his weapons officer, "But be careful not to damage the source of the energy readings. I want that being captured alive." The first energy blasts lit up the sky above Mount Helios. They were warning shots designed to demonstrate the fleet's power rather than cause actual damage. But their message was clear: surrender or face destruction. In the crystal cave below, Taman felt each blast like a physical blow. His connection to the planet's energy systems was so strong that attacks on the surface affected him directly. The silver markings on his skin flared with angry red light as his body responded to the threat. "I have to go up there," Taman said to Veltheris and Nari. "If I stay hidden, they will destroy everything looking for me." Veltheris growled deep in his throat. "They want to capture you and use your power for their own purposes." Before Taman could respond, new ships appeared in the sky above them. These vessels were sleeker and more elegant than the Hegemony warships. They belonged to the Preservation Coalition, and they positioned themselves between the Hegemony fleet and the planet's surface. "Elder." Suman's voice echoed across all communication channels. "General Desung, you are in violation of galactic law. This planet and its inhabitants are under Coalition protection. Withdraw your forces immediately."
Yes.
Desung's harsh laughter filled the airwaves. "The Coalition has no authority here, old woman. We detected the progenitor signals first. that gives us salvage rights to whatever technology is on this world. This is not about salvage rights, Sumain replied firmly. We are talking about a living being, someone who may hold the key to healing the damage that centuries of war have caused throughout the galaxy. As the two fleets faced each other in orbit, Commander Nari found herself caught in an impossible situation. Her small exploration ship was no match for either fleet, but she had a responsibility to protect Taman and report back to the Galactic Council. Taman made the decision for all of them. Despite Velthoris's protests, he walked out of the cave and stood in the open, where the orbital sensors could detect him clearly. The energy readings from his position immediately spiked to levels that both fleets had never seen before. I am the one you are looking for. Temin broadcast on all frequencies. My name is Temin, and I am willing to talk. But I will not be taken by force. The response from both fleets was immediate. General Daisung ordered his troops to prepare for planetary assault. Elder Sumin dispatched her fastest shuttles to reach the surface before the hegemony forces could land. But as the first shuttle broke through the atmosphere, something unexpected happened. Teman's markings began to glow with blinding intensity, and waves of energy pulsed outward from his position. Every ship in orbit suddenly found their weapon systems shutting down. Not damaged or destroyed, but simply turned off as if someone had flipped a switch. What is happening? Sung demanded of his technical staff. Why are our weapons offline? His chief engineer stared at his instruments in confusion. Energy pulses from the planet are interfacing with our systems. It is as if they are speaking directly to our computers and telling them to stand down. Similar reports were coming from the coalition ships. The energy waves were not destructive, but they were incredibly sophisticated. They seemed to understand the technology of both fleets better than the crews who operated them. Taman stood in the clearing outside, the cave with his arms raised toward the sky. He could feel the minds of everyone in the orbiting ships. Their thoughts and emotions flowed through him like water. The hegemony soldiers were angry and frustrated. The coalition crews were amazed and hopeful, but underlying everything was fear of the unknown. Can sense your thoughts. Taman broadcast to both fleets. You are afraid of me, but I am more afraid of myself than you could ever be. As he spoke, images began to flash through his mind. Visions of a vast civilization that spanned the galaxy. Cities that floated among the stars. Technologies that could reshape reality itself. And then something dark and hungry that began consuming everything in its path. The visions became stronger and more detailed. Temin saw the final days of the progenitor civilization as they faced an enemy that could not be fought with conventional weapons. He watched as they made the ultimate sacrifice to contain a threat that could have destroyed all life in the universe. The progenitors did not transcend, Taman said aloud, as the visions filled his consciousness. They died protecting the galaxy from something that came from outside reality itself. They left me behind as their final safeguard. Both fleets received telemetry from the planet that showed massive energy buildups deep beneath the surface. Ancient machinery that had been dormant for millions of years was coming online. The power levels were beyond anything in their databases. General Daesung realized that his weapons would be useless against technology this advanced. But he was not willing to give up his prize. Deploy ground forces, he ordered. If we cannot blast him out, we will dig him out. Elder Suman tried to negotiate. General, please reconsider. If this young man truly is connected to the progenitors, then he may be our only hope of accessing their healing technologies. My people are dying from a plague that only progenitor medicine might be able to cure. Your people's problems are not my concern, Daesung replied coldly. I want that power for the hegemony. Nothing else matters. The first hegemony dropships launched toward the planet's surface. They were heavily armored transports carrying elite troops equipped with the most advanced weapons available. But as they entered the atmosphere, they encountered something that changed everything. Temin was no longer standing alone in the clearing. Velthoris had emerged from the cave in all his ancient glory. The dragon's silver scales reflected the light of the energy discharges like a living mirror. His eyes burned with the fury of someone whose family was being threatened. "You will not harm him," Valtheris declared, in a voice that shook the mountains. "I have protected him for 20 years, and I will not stop now." The dragon's roar echoed. Across the planet and up into space, where it was picked up by every sensor array in both fleets, it was a sound of such primal power that even hardened soldiers felt their courage waver. But Taman placed a gentle hand on one of Valtheris's great claws. "No, my friend, violence will not solve this. There has to be another way." As he spoke, the ancient machinery beneath Mount Helios reached full activation. Energy patterns that had not been seen for millions of years began broadcasting across the galaxy, and on distant worlds other dormant progenitor sites began to respond. The convergence that was taking place above Kairos was just the beginning. Forces were awakening that would reshape the balance of power throughout known space. Of it all was a young man who was only now beginning to understand the true weight of his destiny. The time for hiding was over. The time for choice had arrived. The battle above Kairos began at dawn on the 4th day. General Daesung grew tired of waiting and ordered his fleet to attack the coalition ships directly. If he could not have the progenitor heir, then he would make sure no one else could have him either. Massive energy beams lit up the sky as the two fleets engaged in combat. The hegemony ships were heavily armed and built for destruction. The coalition vessels were more advanced but fewer in number. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the stars as ships on both sides took damage. On the planet's surface, Taman watched the battle with growing horror. These beings were destroying each other because of him, because of power that he did not fully understand and had never asked for. The guilt and responsibility weighed on him like a physical burden. "This has to stop," he said to Nari and Valtheris. "Too many people are dying because of me." Commander Nari tried to contact both fleets and arrange a ceasefire, but her communications were jammed by military encryption. The battle had taken on a life of its own, and neither side seemed willing to back down. Valtheris spread his great wings protectively over Taman. "The fault is not yours, young one. These beings choose to fight. You cannot control the actions of others, only your own." But Taman was no longer listening to their words. The visions that had been growing stronger over the past few days suddenly overwhelmed his consciousness completely. He found himself standing not in the crystal cave, but in a vast chamber filled with impossible technologies. Around him stood figures in advanced armor that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Their faces were hidden behind visors, but their voices spoke directly into his mind. These were the progenitors, and they had been waiting for him to finally access their stored memories. "You are the key," they told him in unison. "The final safeguard. We created before our civilization fell. The choice we could not make, you must make for us." The chamber around Taman shifted and changed, showing him visions of the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. The progenitor civilization had been magnificent beyond imagining. They had built cities that spanned entire star systems, had created technologies that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself, but their greatest achievement had also been their downfall. In their quest to understand the universe, they had accidentally opened a gateway to something that existed beyond normal space and time, something that fed on consciousness itself and grew stronger with every mind it consumed. "We called it the void hunger," the progenitor voices explained. "It was not evil in the way you understand evil. It was simply alien beyond all comprehension. It existed to consume, and it saw all consciousness as food." Taman watched in horror as the visions showed him the final war between the progenitor civilization and the entity they had unleashed. Entire worlds had been drained of all thinking life. Star systems had gone dark as the void hunger spread across the galaxy like a plague. "We tried to fight it with weapons and failed," the voices continued. "We tried to reason with it and failed. In the end, we had only one option left. We sealed ourselves in it together, in a prison built from our own life force." The visions showed Taman the moment of the progenitor's final sacrifice. Billions of beings had willingly given up their physical existence to create a barrier that would contain the void hunger. But the prison was not perfect. It required constant maintenance and renewal. "That is why we created you," the voices said. You are the key that can either strengthen the prison forever or release us to fight again. But the choice must be yours alone. Taman found himself standing before two crystalline structures. One pulsed with gentle blue light, while the other blazed with fierce golden energy. He understood instinctively what each represented. The blue crystal was the containment protocol. If he activated it, he would become part of the prison that held the void hunger. His consciousness would join with the progenitors in maintaining the barrier for all eternity. The galaxy would be safe, but he would cease to exist as an individual. The golden crystal was the release protocol. It would free the stored consciousness of the progenitor civilization and allow them to fight the void hunger once more. There was no guarantee they would win. And if they failed, the entity would be free to consume all life in the galaxy. I cannot make this choice alone, Taman said to the progenitor voices. Affects everyone who lives, everyone who might ever live. Above him, the battle between the fleets was reaching a critical point. Several ships had been destroyed, and debris was raining down on the planet's surface. General Daesung had become so obsessed with claiming Taman that he was willing to destroy Kairos entirely to prevent anyone else from having him. Elder Suman's flagship was badly damaged and losing power. Her final message reached the planet just as Taman was struggling with his impossible choice. Please, she broadcast. My people are dying. If there is any way to save them, please help us. At the same time, one of Daesung's damaged cruisers began falling toward the planet. Its trajectory would take it directly into Mount Helios, where the impact would cause massive destruction. The crew was trying to evacuate, but many would not escape in time. Taman realized that both sides needed his help. The coalition needed healing technology to save their dying worlds. The hegemony needed to be stopped before they destroyed everything in their quest for power. And the falling ship needed to be saved before it killed thousands of innocent people. As he looked at the two crystals before him, Taman had a sudden inspiration. What if there was a third option that the progenitors had never considered? What if instead of choosing between the two protocols, he could find a way to combine them? He reached out with both hands and touched both crystals simultaneously. The moment his skin made contact with the ancient artifact's energies beyond imagining flowed through his body. The blue light of containment merged with the golden light of release, creating something entirely new. The progenitor voices gasped in amazement, as Taman did something they had thought impossible. Instead of activating either protocol separately, he created a bridge between them, a way to release their consciousness while maintaining the prison that held the void hunger. How? They asked in wonder. Taman smiled as understanding flooded. Through him, because I am not just progenitor technology. I am also human. And humans have always been good at finding solutions that others thought impossible. The energy released from his choice sent shockwaves through space and time. The falling hegemony cruiser suddenly found its engines restored and was able to pull out of its death spiral. Weapons systems on both fleets shut down completely as waves of healing energy washed over the damaged ships. But most importantly, the ancient progenitor sites scattered across the galaxy began activating in a new way. Instead of awakening as weapons or tools of control, they became beacons of healing and growth. Technologies that had been dormant for millions of years started working again, not to dominate but to help. Taman opened his eyes to find himself back in the crystal cave. But he was no longer the same person who had entered the vision. The silver markings on his skin now covered his entire body in intricate patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. His eyes held not just starlight, but the wisdom of entire civilizations. He was still human, but he was also something new. A bridge between what was and what could be. The guardian of knowledge that would help the galaxy heal from millions of years of conflict and division. The choice had been made, and it would change everything. The transformation that swept across the galaxy began the moment Taman made his choice. The energy wave that pulsed outward from Kairos traveled faster than light itself, carrying with it the power to heal and restore rather than destroy. On Elder Suman's flagship, the cosmic plague that had been killing her people for generations, suddenly began to retreat. The healing energy flowed through the ship's life support systems and touched every member of her crew. centuries of genetic damage, started to repair itself as the ancient progenitor medical knowledge activated dormant healing protocols in their DNA. "It is impossible," Swimmin whispered, as she watched her dying crew members sit up in their medical beds, with healthy color returning to their faces. "The plague has been part of us for so long we thought it could never be cured." Her chief medical officer stared at his instruments in amazement. "Though the energy from the planet is not just treating the symptoms, it is teaching our own immune systems how to fight the disease. Our bodies are learning to heal themselves." Across the galaxy, similar miracles were taking place. On worlds that had been poisoned by industrial disasters, the soil and water began to purify themselves. Species that had been driven to near extinction found their numbers slowly beginning to recover. Technologies that had been used for war started converting themselves into tools for construction and growth. But the most dramatic change was taking place aboard General Daesung's flagship. The hegemony leader found his weapons systems completely shut down and replaced with manufacturing equipment. His warships were being transformed into mobile factories that could build homes, schools, and hospitals instead of delivering death. "What is happening to my fleet?" Dasun demanded of his engineering staff. His chief technician looked at the readouts with wonder rather than fear. "Sir, the energy from the planet is interfacing with our computer systems, but it is not taking control. It is offering us choices, new ways to use our technology." The Song tried to override the changes, but found that his command codes no longer worked. The ship's computer had evolved beyond his ability to control it. But rather than feeling threatened, he found himself curious about what these new systems could accomplish. On the planet's surface, Taman stood in the crystal cave, surrounded by his friends, but forever changed by his experience. The silver markings that covered his body now pulsed with gentle rhythms that seemed to match the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that touched the soul. "The progenitors are not gone," he explained to Nuri and Veltheris. "They exist now as part of the galaxy's natural systems. They have become the force that maintains balance and encourages growth rather than destruction." Commander Nari stared at her instruments in amazement. "The energy readings are stabilizing at levels that should be impossible. You are generating more power than most stars, but it does not feel dangerous. It feels peaceful." Veltheris nuzzled Taman gently with his great head. "You are no longer the child I raised, but you are still my son. I can sense that the core of who you are remains unchanged." Taman smiled and reached out to touch the dragon's scales. "I am still me, but I am also more than I was. I can feel the thoughts and dreams of every living being in the galaxy. I can help them find ways to work together instead of fighting." Over the following days, representatives from both fleets came down to the planet to meet with Taman. General Daesun arrived first, expecting to find a weapon he could use to conquer his enemies. Instead, he found a young man who showed him visions of what the hegemony could become if they chose cooperation over conquest. "Your people are strong and brave," Taman told the general.
Ow.
"But you have been using your strength to take from others instead of helping them grow. What if you used your military skills to protect the weak instead of conquering them?" Daesung found himself seeing his own actions through new eyes. The worlds his forces had conquered could have been allies instead of subjects. The resources they had taken by force could have been shared through trade. For the first time in his career, he began to question whether might truly made right. Elder Sumin arrived shortly after with tears of gratitude in her eyes. The healing energies had not only cured her people's plague, but had given them hope for the future that they had not felt in generations. "How can we ever repay you for what you have done?" she asked Taman. "By working together," he replied. "The galaxy has been divided for too long. The progenitors fell because they tried to handle every problem alone. We must learn from their mistake and build something better." In the weeks that followed, a new alliance began to form with Kairos as its center. Representatives from dozens of species came to meet with Taman and learn about the progenitor technologies that were awakening across the galaxy. But these were not technologies of war or control. They were tools for healing, understanding, and growth. The hegemony and coalition signed the first peace treaty in their history, with Taman serving as mediator. General Daisung found himself working alongside Elder Sumen to establish trade routes and cultural exchange programs. Former enemies became partners in building a better future for all. Commander. Nari was promoted to serve as the first ambassador between the Galactic Council and what became known as the Progenitor Alliance. Her job was to help other species understand that the ancient technologies were not threats, but opportunities for growth and cooperation. Valtheris remained on Kairos as the guardian of the Crystal Caves, which had become a place of pilgrimage for beings from across the galaxy. The ancient dragon found new purpose in teaching visitors about the history of the progenitors and the importance of learning from the past. But it was Temin who became the living symbol of what the galaxy could achieve when its people worked. Together, he established schools where beings from different species could study alongside each other. He created research centers where the greatest minds in the galaxy collaborated on solving problems that affected everyone. Most importantly, he served as a bridge between the various factions that had been fighting for so long. When disputes arose, he could help each side understand the other's perspectives. When resources were scarce, he could find ways to share them fairly. When old grudges threatened to restart ancient conflicts, he could show people new paths forward. The galaxy was far from perfect. There were still conflicts and disagreements. Some species remained suspicious of the changes while others tried to move too fast. But for the first time in millions of years, there was hope that things could get better. Children who grew up in this new era learned about cooperation before they learned about war. They studied the languages and cultures of other species as naturally as they learned about their own. They saw the galaxy not as a collection of separate worlds, but as a single community where everyone had something valuable to contribute. And at the center of it all was the young man, who had been found as an abandoned infant in a crystal cave. Taman had discovered that his greatest power was not the ancient technologies flowing through his veins or the cosmic energies he could control. His true strength lay in his ability to help others see past their differences and work toward common goals. The dragon had raised him well. The boy who had been abandoned by unknown parents had grown into a man who became a father figure to an entire galaxy. His legacy would not be one of conquest or domination, but of healing and hope. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, knowing that at last the galaxy had found a path toward peace. And in the crystal caves of Kairos the ancient, machinery hummed with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the long wait was finally over. The choice had been made. The future had begun.